So you're new to airbrushing and you don't know how to get started? Well, in this video, I'm going to help you figure that out. Let's get into it right now. The first thing you're going to need is an air source. Now, if you're just starting out and you're just planning to give it a go or only airbrush small things where you don't need a lot of time, then you could go with something like this battery powered unit. Still going to give you air. It'll run for about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on which model you go for, and that'll at least get you started. If you're going to be airbrushing for longer periods of time, then you could definitely go with a larger compressor, something like a workshop compressor that you can pick up from most hardware stores. The larger the tank, the less it's going to kick in. It is going to be noisy, but you could set that up away from your working area and just run a long air line. Make sure that there's a moisture trap and regulator on the unit. They usually come with one, as well as one on your bench, closest to where you're airbrushing. And when you do run your air lines, run them upwards, so that gravity makes sure that moisture always flows back down, not towards where you're airbrushing. So if you do have a bit more money to spend, then I'd recommend something like this. Out of all the Iwata compressors, and there are quite a few, plus there's plenty of other brands on the market that are great as well, but I like this one here, the IS975 PowerJet Pro. The reason I like it is it has a 2-litre tank, so it's well and truly big enough to handle most of your airbrushing projects, and it's not going to continuously run. It also has the dual regulators, so you could set one airbrush up at 18 to 20 psi for all of your detailed airbrushing, and then for your general airbrushing you could set this one up at 30 to 40 psi. It does come with some holders on the top, but I don't use those. I still use the clamped holders that go on your bench. So you also notice this one has the dual connectors, so you can just click straight in with your airbrushing hose. This is a 1/4 inch fitting, and then this side has the quick connect on the 1/8, and then this hooks up to your airbrush. When you're finished, you can just unhook it and it's nice and clean. It can be packed away. It's relatively easy to move around and carry. It is fairly heavy, be about 10 or more kilo. And to give you an idea of how loud it is, you can hear that's not that loud at all. So you can definitely use this when you're airbrushing late at night, and it's not going to disturb your neighbours. And I'll pop links to this product as well as all the other ones that I've mentioned in this video in the description below. So once you've sorted out your compressor, the next thing that you need to decide on is what kind of airbrush you want. Do you want a single action airbrush, which is great for all sorts of basic hobbies, coloring in? It's much harder to create fine details, so it may limit you in the future. However, it is a lot easier to get the feel for. Or do you want to go with a double action airbrush, which will give you greater versatility? You'll be able to do pretty much anything with it once you get the feel for it. However, it is a lot more difficult to get the hang of. So the airbrush that I'm showing you here is the GSI Krios PS289. Now this is a great all-round beginner brush. It's also perfect when you advance. You can still do fine detail and everything else that you need to do with the airbrush. This is a double action airbrush. So what that means is that when I press down for air, I need to pull back for paint. A single action, I would press down for air and I would get paint coming out straight away. And the way you would adjust a single action is there would be a dial on the front that you can wind in and out to increase or decrease the thickness of your line. So as you can see, with a double action, press down for air, nothing's coming out, and then when I pull back, I'm going to get paint. If I want to do a fine line, I move up nice and close and pull back a little bit and increase my speed. For a broader stroke, I move away from the surface and I pull back further on that trigger, and I can also move slower if I wish, and that's going to coat that area a lot quicker. So you can see the versatility of a double action airbrush straight away with this demo. So the next thing you need to decide on is whether or not you wish to use a gravity feed airbrush. So same as what I just used. And gravity means that you put paint in the cup and gravity naturally lets that paint flow through the airbrush, and the air will then propel it out through the fine fluid nozzle and onto the surface. And then, as mentioned earlier, you just control it with the trigger finger. You may also want to get something like a suction feed airbrush, and this is actually what I started on when I first started learning how to airbrush. I was using a Pash VL or a Pache, and it took me a while to go from a suction feed to a gravity, but you may want to own one of each. Now, a suction feed means that you put your paint in this little jar, and you can see this tiny hose here that's going to suck up the paint and then feed that into your airbrush, and then it will propel that out through the fluid nozzle. Now, to hook this up, you just that on there and then carefully twist it into place. They're all a little bit different, but that's now ready to go. One thing I do like about the suction feed brushes is that you can hold onto the jar, and that makes it nice and comfortable when you are airbrushing. These airbrushes are typically used by t-shirt artists who need hundreds of different colors, so they would in most cases have hundreds of airbrushes hooked up with all different colors in the jar so that they can complete their t-shirts really quickly. You can also use this if you're wanting to spray larger areas, because a lot of the suction feed brushes you'll be able to get in a 0.5 mil, and then you could hook up something like this, which you can see will hold a lot more paint than the jar that comes with it. So again, it's personal preference between one or the other. I think if you want to do more general airbrushing, I would stick with a gravity feed. I do prefer them now, but as I mentioned, I did start on a suction. That said, if you're more comfortable with a suction, then definitely go with that. Whatever works best for you. And now a quick showcase of some of my favorite brushes. I've got the GSI Krios PS289, the Iwata HPCS Eclipse, the GSI Krios PS771 for fine detail work, and the CMSB Micron, which runs a 0.18mm needle nozzle setup, so great for fine detail. It has, however, been now replaced by the Iwata Takumi. Pretty much the same brush, it just has a larger side cup. Now, as far as needle sizes for the others, the 771 also runs a 0.18mm needle nozzle setup. The Eclipse runs a 0.35mm, and the PS289 runs a 0.3. So these are only a few of my airbrushes, but these are the ones that I use most regularly. There are loads of other brands that are just as good, so shop around and get something that you're comfortable holding as well, because you're going to be hanging on to it for quite some time when you're doing your artwork, so it needs to be comfortable in your hand. So now that you have your compressor, you've selected an appropriate airbrush for your needs, the next thing you're going to need is some paint. The two main types of paint that I use are automotive urethanes, but most of the time I'm airbrushing with water-based paints. Let me show you what I use. Okay, so when I'm using automotive paints, I use House of Color or DNA paints, both of which are great depending on what you want, what colors and what kind of project you're doing. Just be careful with all of these sort of paints. If you are going to use them at home, you need to wear gloves, a proper respirator, have adequate ventilation, and I'd also recommend that you wear some eye protection. Ideally, you want to be spraying these sort of things in a booth, and you want them to be clear coated by professionals. So after using automotive paints, I would clean out my airbrushes with gun wash. To thin them out, I would be using a base coat reducer, and you can also get some really cool effects paints, like for instance this Mutant Crystal here by DNA, but there's a large list from numerous brands of really cool special effects paints that you can get that you just can't get with water-based paints. So that is one of the benefits. Plus, you'll also find that when using automotive paints, they do tend to tip dry a lot less. So the paints that I use most frequently and the ones I like using the most are the Trident airbrush paints. These are an automotive grade pigment. You can buy reducers to thin out your paint, and they do flow very close to automotive base coats. So you can see how nicely the Trident paints flow. They're super smooth. You can get really fine detail. Now this is running through the 771, which is a 0.18mm needle nozzle setup, and there's no issue there spraying those paints through such a fine nozzle. The other great thing is that they can be clear coated with acrylic or 2-pack clear. You can also use them on t-shirts. Just use a t-shirt booster to seal in your artwork when you're done. And another great thing is that these can also be used with a paintbrush. The other water-based paint that I like using are the Createx illustration colors. The beauty of these are they are transparent, so you can mix these colors by spraying one color over another directly on the surface. You can also shift the tone of another color and continue to darken your shading just using the one tone. To give you a quick example of this, if I spray directly over where I sprayed my Trident paint with this magenta, you'll be able to notice that I can darken off some of those areas, especially if I go heavier here. It also tints the blue, so you can easily blend and work back over the top of your artwork. So now if I spray over the top with some cerulean blue, you can see how that changes from the white surface to where I've got that magenta. It's almost going a very, very dark violet, so it would work really well as a shadow tone. So to fast track your learning, you can definitely check out our online airbrushing course at airbrushisylum.thinkific.com, or you can continue to watch some of the other videos that I've got listed here. And until next time, go grab your airbrush, do some amazing artwork yourself, and I'll see you again very, very soon in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.